welcome back. Earlier this spring, I made a trip over to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania to shoot some videos for the channel, but I figured why not capture the whole trip in this one video here as well. My friend Adam came along because he's definitely my partner in crime when it comes to nerding out on drums, and it was certainly nice to have some company along for the trip. We hit the road about 7:30 a.m. because we had a good 10 to 11 hours of driving ahead of us, and we'd be losing an hour going from the Central to Eastern time zone. I'd been planning this trip for a while to shoot a few new episodes for my Off the Beaten Path series. Over the last 2 years, I've managed to travel through Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and Michigan for this series, but I've not yet been able to travel outside the Midwest. There's no shortage of places to visit in my local and regional area, but it's exciting to expand this series out a bit further and highlight some really cool spots. We spent the morning and early afternoon getting out of Wisconsin, and then through Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, but right about the time we hit Toledo, we made a quick detour into Michigan to check in with a fellow vintage drum enthusiast who I'd been in touch with about buying one of his kits. He had a Gretsch Drop G kit that was a perfect match to the one I already owned, just in larger sizes. When we got to his place to check it out, I was floored by the condition and match to mine, so I didn't waste much time meeting his price and packing these ones up in the car to take with me. It was nice to break up the drive and get out of the car for a bit, but since we still had another 4 hours of driving left to go, we got on the road pretty quickly to try and get to Pittsburgh at a decent hour. We did make a quick stop for gas and dinner at a travel oasis, but after refueling the Prius and our stomachs, we powered through the final hour of driving and rolled into Pittsburgh around 8 p.m. This video doesn't have a sponsor, but if it did, it would definitely be my sister Kelly and her business workshop, where she let us crash for the few nights we spent in town. If you're in the Pittsburgh area and want to take some classes on all sorts of DIY activities, she runs this place along with a few retail shops in the area. It might seem a bit unique to stay in a warehouse workshop space, but it was surprisingly comfortable and certainly a cool vibe in here. And after a full day of driving, we were just happy to grab some sleep anywhere. After recharging from the day of travel, we drove into town to grab some breakfast. Per my sister's recommendation, we checked out Wise County Cafe, and if you're in the area, this place is a must. Hands down, best biscuits I've ever had. After finishing breakfast, we made our way over to the first video shoot of this trip with Hawthorne Drum Shop. I've followed this store for ages, and in fact, I bought a kit from them back in 2021 while at the Chicago Drum Show. The owner, Chris Hawthorne, has built this place up to be one of the top independent shops when it comes to finding vintage drums. We spent the next 3 hours with Chris, and it was a huge challenge for me to take his 90-minute interview and trim it down into a 30-minute video. Chris has such great insight into the world of not only vintage drums, but the music retail industry, and what it takes to make a store like this successful in today's world. The shop has been on my bucket list to visit for some time, and it certainly did not disappoint. If I hadn't blown all my money the day before on that Gretsch kit in Michigan, I probably would have left here with a set. After finishing up at Hawthorne, we wrapped up the day with Kelly and her husband Dan at a great restaurant downtown, Walter's Barbecue. On Tuesday morning, I woke up and started my day by getting back to some emails and catching up on some work, because you're never truly off the clock as a freelancer. We left the workshop around 10 and went into town to grab some breakfast, and as much as I would have been happy to go right back to Wise County, we decided to try another spot, Cafe Moulin. I never knew how much I was missing in my life until I tried one of their crepe omelets. I promise this won't turn into a food channel, but every meal we had on this trip was amazing, and I feel like I need to give credit to all of these spots. After another delicious breakfast, we made our way over to the second shoot of this trip at the home studio of Mike Dawson. I think I first became a fan of Mike when he started his podcast with Mike Johnston, but even if I wasn't totally aware of it, I'd been reading his articles in Modern Drummer since I was a teenager, developing my love of drums. I've looked up to Mike for a long time, and he's not only an important part of the media landscape for writing and podcasting, but he's also a top-notch player who's in demand for performing in studio work. Ever since he moved to Pittsburgh and built out his most current home studio, I've always taken note of how cool his space is, so it was a real treat to not only step inside and check it out firsthand, but get to shoot it and share it with everybody else out there. Mike has a ton of knowledge to share, and I love how every drum in his collection has a great story behind it, but also a specific function in the work he does. After a couple hours with Mike in his home studio, we all trucked over to the headquarters of Drum Factory Direct, where Mike is the Chief Creative Officer. As somebody who's built, modified, and repaired drums for well over a decade, I've been relying on DFD to find the parts I need for almost any project. It was wild to get a behind-the-scenes look at their converted church and walk through all the aisles and see tens of thousands of different parts all for drums. The whole building is a standing testament to the DIY spirit, and it truly embodies their tagline as the drummer's candy store. Once we wrapped up filming, Adam decided to buy a whole set of parts for a new snare, and then we made our way into the city one more time to grab dinner. To this point, we've had a number of great meals, but I knew we couldn't leave Pittsburgh without stopping at Primanti Brothers and getting one of their famous sandwiches. After a good night's sleep, we woke up pretty early in order to pack up everything we had accumulated on the trip, and we were able to get on the road by 8 a.m. As we made our way through Pittsburgh one final time, it was a nice chance to reflect on how much I enjoy this city. Being someone who lives in a small town in Wisconsin, I've never really been able to imagine myself living in a big city, but in both of my trips to Pittsburgh, I've always felt like I could see myself living here. Maybe it's their history of being a blue-collar town in the steel industry, or more likely, it's the way every place in town embraces their NFL team with the same reverence we do here in Wisconsin, but I've always felt like I could be happy in this city. With that being said, if I had one complaint about Pittsburgh, it's easily the beer I drank that was a collaboration between Iron City Beer and Turner's Iced Tea. This was a great example of how sometimes two great things don't always work better together. We took a similar route back home, but I decided it would be worth the extra hour to take a slight detour to Fort Wayne, Indiana, in order to check out the headquarters of Sweetwater. It was about halfway between the start and end of our day, so it worked out perfect to get out of the car and check out their amazing retail store and campus. The store certainly doesn't even scratch the surface of all they sell, but it was really impressive to see, and we got to check out some really cool instruments I've never seen in person before, like the new DWE kit, which is totally wireless and unlike any electric drum set you've seen before. Outside of the retail store, we briefly walked through a bit of the campus, including their food court, lesson academy, video studio, and of course, their wall of all the brands they work with. We got in the car around 2 p.m. and tried our best to get to Chicago before too much of the weekday traffic kicked in, and although we did have a bit of it, it only added about 15 to 20 minutes onto our drive. As we got back into Wisconsin, it started to feel like home again, especially once we made a pit stop at Quick Trip. After some snacks and gas in the Prius, we got back on the road to get through the last couple hours of driving and finally get home. At this point, I looked back on how great and productive this trip had been. Over 4 days, we drove nearly 1,400 miles through 6 states and visited some really amazing spaces and people, and of course, ate some delicious food. This was a huge endeavor for me, setting aside 4 days from my daily routine to dedicate towards filming for this channel, and although I do make some money from the channel, it's certainly not enough to cover the cost of a trip like this. I'm not complaining at all, and I wouldn't change it for a thing, but if you want to show some support for the work I do, please subscribe to the channel, engage with the videos, and if you're so inclined, the Super Thanks feature is a great way to help me fund more trips like this in the future. Once again, I want to extend a huge thanks to Hawthorne Drum Shop, Drum Factory Direct, and Mike Dawson for taking the time to show us around during this trip. I'd love to hear what you think about these videos we shot together, so leave a comment with your favorite down below. And until next time, thanks.